Yes, Yvonne. I listened to quite a few of your statements here, and it sends the mind wandering all over the planet. When you mention Belmarsh, there's also a place in Scotland called Dungavel. It's on a place with Paramarimarimo. And when you look at these different governments, or parliaments, or White Houses, you make the very valid point they're not to be trusted, nor is the media, as the media is only there to dictate what the people want to hear. They've got people split up like Goebbels had before the First World War, and you look at the Second World War, I should say, and when you look at people were divided there, they had German against German, British against British, and the common denominator has been missing in the speech tonight, or in the address tonight. These various politicians, they're totally dependent on capital. And when you look at the huge finance houses and investment houses, they dictate terms to whichever government they're going to give money to. And as far as Winston Peters goes, he's no different from any other politician that's not telling the truth. Incidentally, Peters is like myself. He's half Irish, half Scots. He's half Scotch, half Maori. What are we all? We're merely human beings under the dictates of imperialism and capitalism. And what's happening in New Zealand right now, we've seen an insidious way that the media is playing one group off against the other, the same as it did in any previous wars or any reason it caused dissent among the working class.
I agree wholeheartedly with what you say, and you know, if we have a bad media, it's our fault. If you don't like what you read, send in a letter and complain. You actually can change the media if you do it collectively and demand a better service. Editors do monitor the volume of letters that come in, and if they get a lot of letters on one particular theme, even though they might only print one or two, they will be aware that there is concern there. So it's important not only to use places like this as an arena to sound off, but also to put your feelings in letters and send them off as well.
Assalamu alaikum, Yvonne. I have a question for you. The American spin doctors have advised President Bush to stop using the phrase war on terrorism and call it struggle against extremist violence. If struggle means jihad, do you think the Americans are now launching their own jihad movement? Your comments, please. Thank you.
As I said before, the Americans, well, it's not the Americans. I mean, we've got to be careful not to demonize the Americans. 50 million Americans did not vote for George Bush. So, you know, we must remember that. And it's bad enough that we have to talk about him now. It must be hell actually having to live in a country that's been run by him when you haven't voted for him. American imperialism has been at the heart of most of the world's wars in the last century. And in fact, if you look at American foreign policy for the future, they use a term called full spectrum dominance. And this is what they are setting out to do, full spectrum dominance. And it means they want to control the land, the sea, the sky, and outer space. They want to control it all. But it isn't for the Americans, because don't believe all this rubbish about the American dream. We all see the Hollywood images of large Manhattan apartments with 6 friends living and having happy lives, and all the other Hollywood images. The reality is over 50 million people in America are without basic health care. Infant mortality rates are higher in some states than in parts of Latin America. Black men in Detroit have a lower life expectancy than men living in Bangladesh. The American dream is only for a select few, for the American imperialists, for the neocons who are in the White House and don't even think that they care about the armies that they send out to invade Muslim lands. These soldiers, there are 40,000 soldiers called green card soldiers. These are kids from Guatemala, Mexico, and other countries who have been promised fast-track citizenship if they join up for Uncle Sam. So, you know, there are two levels. There are the neocons, and then there are the ordinary people. And as I say, more than 50 million Americans did not vote for Bush, so we should really be careful to differentiate.
Yvonne, I have a son and 2 daughters. I cannot imagine living in a system where my son would feel it his duty to express his disapproval of my daughter's boyfriend by killing her. When will honest killings cease in the Middle East?
Well, it's not just the Middle East, it's across Asia as well, and it's not just a Muslim problem. It's a cultural problem. And it's actually not just reserved to those areas, because it is a much wider problem. But please, for one moment, don't think it's a Muslim problem, and please, for one moment, don't think that honor killings have anything at all to do with Islam, because they certainly don't.
How do you explain your life after being a Muslim, doing your day-to-day activities and praying 5 times in a day and continue your profession? Because a lot of women who are not Muslims may believe that if they join Islam, they're not able to continue their profession, or they're not able to do their own day-to-day activities. How do you explain your life after being a Muslim? Thank you.
There is absolutely nothing that a Muslim woman can do that a Western woman can't, and vice versa. We all aspire to pray 5 times a day. Sometimes I get there, sometimes I don't. Each day I'm evolving and developing to improve myself as a Muslim. But wearing a hijab does not weigh me down and prevent me from doing things. And I was just saying to somebody a few days ago that I still do things like whitewater rafting, like windsurfing, and I wear my hijab, and it doesn't tip over the sails. You know, it can be quite an asset, in fact. There is nothing that women around the world cannot do if they set their minds to it, and whether they're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheist, Hindu, Sikh, there's nothing that any of us can't do.
I come here not as a Muslim, and I came here to learn about Muslimism and not about politics. But what does fascinate me is that the realm of suicide bombers that are going either, be it in the Middle East, be it in London, wherever, and who do it in the name of Muslim, how they can justify that to themselves, and how we can, as a caring populace, change that very culture, because it seems, as an outsider, to be so imbued in them. They don't care what it does to their families, nor to anybody else, the other people that they kill. And I think it's a very real problem for the world to try and give that sense of caring back to those disaffected people.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, that's a great question, and you can't just lump all of those people into one area. I actually looked into the background of a so-called suicide bomber in Palestine 2 years ago to try, and it was research I was doing for a book, to try and understand what makes a young man want to blow himself up. And this particular young man, his father had cancer, but it was curable. All he needed to do was to walk out of his house, go across the road, go through an Israeli checkpoint, and go to the hospital 5 minutes away every day for chemotherapy, and his cancer would be cured. The Israeli checkpoint refused to allow him through, and eventually the cancer went from being curable to terminal. Now I want you all to imagine this is your father. This is your father who's suddenly gone from having curable cancer to terminal cancer. You're watching him die. There is nothing you can do. The soldiers at the Israeli checkpoint are refusing to let him through for treatment. And I actually had some non-Muslim students from Bristol University. I was telling them this tale, and I said, come on, what are you going to do? Your father is dying in front of your eyes. What are you going to do? And one of them said, well, I would write to the UN. And I said, well, that's very nice. Israel has violated and ignored more than 72 UN rules and regulations. They're not going to take any notice of the UN, not for your father. Come on, what are you going to do? And they were getting really upset and agitated. And really, one of them was nearly in tears because he could see, it's my father, what am I going to do to help him? And his father died, the most excruciating, painful death imaginable, because he didn't even have painkillers. I'm not justifying what that young man did, but that was his background. In Chechnya, you have the Black Widows, the women who also strap explosives to themselves and blow themselves up. They're using their bodies as weapons. It's the only thing they've got. If they wanted to really commit suicide, they would slash their wrists and be done. They're trying to fight a war. Chechnya is the forgotten Palestine. You look at every single profile of a so-called Chechnyan Black Widow. Invariably, their husbands have gone, disappeared, murdered by the Russian army. When the Beslan school atrocity happened, and over 300 children died in that horrendous situation last year, nobody would have cried harder than the Chechnyan mothers, because in the last decade they have lost 42,000 of their children. They know what the pain is like. And when you've lost your children and your husband, and you've been gang raped by drunken Russian soldiers, maybe there is nothing left inside, and you want to fight back, and you fight back the only way you think you can. I'm not justifying it, but look at the backgrounds of these people. The London bombings, the only surprise was that it didn't happen sooner. We knew it was linked to the illegal war in Iraq. And you know, we've had 2 minutes silence for the innocent victims, more than 3,000 in 9/11. We had 2 minutes silence for those beautiful young people who perished in Bali, for the people who were killed in Kenya, Indonesia, Madrid, and now London. And then yesterday, another unexpected innocent victim of the war on terror, a young Brazilian man who was buried just a few hours ago in his hometown after being shot dead by British police. We've had 2 minutes silence for all of those people. But what about the deafening silence of the hundreds of thousands of innocents who've died in Palestine, in Iraq, Afghanistan, Chechnya, Kashmir, Uzbekistan? You know, it's when 9/11 happened, one of the things that was played over and over again, I remember, was one of the passengers from the plane who realized she was going to die. And she picked up her cell phone and switched it on, and she dialed her home. Nobody was there, so she left a message on the answer machine. And she left a message of love to her family. It was her final words on this earth, messages of peace and love to her family. And that message was played again and again, and it still brings tears to my eyes when I think of how helpless she must have felt, an innocent victim of 9/11. But just because a woman in the Gaza Strip doesn't carry a cell phone in her purse, or a woman in Kabul doesn't have a mobile, or a woman in Basra or Babylon or Baghdad or Chechnya or Kashmir, just because they don't have mobile phones in their purses, it doesn't make their life any less valuable. But unfortunately, in this unequal world in which we live, the life of a Westerner is worth so much more than the life of a Muslim. Muslim blood is very cheap. And where there is injustice, resistance is the only answer in any walk of life. Fortunately, in places like New Zealand, our resistance can take place by writing a letter to the newspaper, by phoning a late-night phone-in show, by signing a petition, by marching, by voting in the elections, as long as you vote for the right candidate. Doing something, reacting. It's our duty as human beings, as people who care about justice. And until there is justice in the world for everybody, there is never going to be peace, and that is the reality.
About yourself and in your relationship with a god or religion. It says in this newspaper article that you have a certain amount of disorder in your life in relation to cigarettes, alcohol and relationships. I just wonder why you have to embrace a religion, any religion, in order to get some sort of order back into your life. Thank you.
I didn't. When I was, I worked hard and I played hard. And because I worked hard and I played hard, it had a knock-on effect, and I had a disastrous private life. But that was while I was a Christian, you know, the twice-a-month practicing Christian. I only sorted out most of those problems, apart from the cigarettes, when I embraced Islam. And the reason, I didn't think that that would actually happen as quickly as it did. And the reason it happened as quickly as it did is because if you follow Islam, your life becomes so much more simpler. All the excesses of Western living just falls away, and you're left with a very wholesome, simple life and a code of ethics, and not unlike the similar codes in Judaism and Christianity. And it's just a better code for living. So I swapped one religion for another, but I found the simplicity of Islam simplified my own life. And my friends will tell me that I'm looking happier and healthier and more confident and more fulfilled. And it's quite funny because my girlfriends still refuse to believe that it's Islam. And these liberated, hard-drinking journalist women are saying, we know why you've converted to Islam, it's got to be for a man. And I've said, no, it's not. I've done it for me. And it was one of the best moves that I made.
Was Islam hard for you to learn?
Islam is it's a challenge, and each day we meet that challenge full of optimism, and we try and evolve and develop and strive towards being a perfect Muslim. I am a long, long way from that, but I am striving and trying every day, and I will get there, inshallah. So make dua for me.
Thank you, my girl.